Hello and welcome back to the channel. My name is Josh and we are watching our history. Today we continue with Paul Kruger and his involvement in the road to war. Anglo-German relations warmed during the late 1898, with Berlin disavowing any interest in the Transvaal. This opened the way for Milner and Chamberlain to take a firmer line against Kruger. The so-called Edgar case of early 1899, in which a South African Republic policeman was acquitted of manslaughter after shooting a British subject dead during an attempted arrest, prompted outcry from the British element in the Transvaal, and is highlighted by Nathan as the starting point of the final agitation which led to war. The South African League, a new Uitlander movement, prepared two petitions, one with more than 20,000 signatures to appeal to Queen Victoria for intervention against the Transvaal government, which they called inefficient, corrupt and oppressive. Other Uitlanders produced a counter-petition in which about as many affirmed their satisfaction with Kruger's government. Attempting to address the main point of contention raised by Milner and Chamberlain, Kruger spoke of reducing the residency qualification for foreigners to 9 years, or perhaps less. In May and June 1899, he and Milner met in Bloemfontein, with Steyn taking the role of mediator. "You must make concessions on the franchise issue," Steyn counselled. Franchise after a residence of 14 years is in conflict with the first principles of a republican and democratic government. The Free State expects you to concede. Should you not give in on this issue, you will lose all sympathy and all your friends. Kruger answered that he had already indicated his willingness to lower the franchise and was prepared to do anything. But they must not touch my independence, he said. They must be reasonable in their demands. Milner wanted full voting rights after 5 years residence, a revised naturalization oath and increased legislative representation for the new burghers. Kruger offered naturalization after 2 years residence and full franchise after 5 more, 7 years effectively, along with increased representation and a new oath similar to that of the Free State. The High Commissioner declared his original request an irreducible minimum and said he would discuss nothing else until the franchise question was resolved. On the 5th of June, Milner proposed an advisory council of non-burghers to represent the Uitlanders, prompting Kruger to cry, "How can strangers rule my state? How is it possible?" When Milner said he did not foresee the council taking on any governing role, Kruger burst into tears, saying, "It is our country you want." Milner ended the conference that evening, saying the further meetings Steyn and Kruger wanted were unnecessary. Back in Pretoria, Kruger introduced a draft law to give the mining regions 4 more seats in each Volksraad and fix a 7-year residency period for voting rights. This would not be retroactive, but up to 2 years prior residence would be counted towards the 7. The Uitlanders already in the country for 9 years or more would get the vote immediately. Jan Hendrik Hofmeyer of the Afrikaner Bond persuaded Kruger to make this fully retrospective to immediately enfranchise all white men in the country 7 years or more, but Milner and the South African League deemed this insufficient. After Kruger rejected the British proposal of a joint commission on the franchise law, Smuts and Reitz proposed a 5-year retroactive franchise and the extension of a quarter of the Volksraad seats to the Witwatersrand region, on the condition that Britain drop any claim to suzerainty. Chamberlain issued an ultimatum in September 1899 in which he insisted on 5 years without condition, else the British would formulate their own proposals for a final settlement. Kruger resolved that war was inevitable, comparing the Boer's position to that of a man attacked by a lion with only a pocket knife for defense. "Would you be such a coward as not to defend yourself with your pocket knife?" he boasted. Aware of the deployment of British troops from elsewhere in the empire, Kruger and Smuts surmised that from a military standpoint, the Boers' only chance was a swift preemptive strike. Steyn was anxious that they not be seen as aggressors and insisted they delay until there was absolutely no hope of peace. He informed Kruger on the 9th of October that he also now thought war was unavoidable. That afternoon, the Transvaal government handed the British envoy, Conyngham Green, an ultimatum advising that if Britain did not withdraw all troops from the border within 48 hours, a state of war would exist. The British government considered the conditions impossible and informed Kruger of this on the 11th of October 1899. The start of the Second Boer War was announced in Pretoria that day at 1700 local time. The Second Boer War. The outbreak of war raised Kruger's international profile even further. In countries antagonistic to Britain, he was idolized. Kruger expressed high hopes for German, French and Russian military intervention, despite the repeated dispatches from Leyds telling him this was a fantasy. Kruger took no part in the fighting, partly because of his age and poor health. He turned 74 the week the war broke out, but perhaps primarily to prevent his being killed or captured. His personal contributions to the military campaign were mostly from his office in Pretoria, where he oversaw the war effort and advised his officers by telegram. The Boer commandos, including 4 of Kruger's sons, 6 son-in-laws and 33 of his grandsons, advanced quickly into the Cape and Natal, won a series of victories, and by the end of October were besieging Kimberley, Ladysmith and Mafeking. Soon thereafter, following a serious injury of Wolvaardt, Kruger appointed Louis Botha as acting Commandant General. The British relief of Kimberley and Ladysmith in February 1900 marked the turning of the war against the Boers. Morale plummeted among the commandos over the following months, with many burghers simply going home. Kruger toured the front in response and asserted that any man who deserted at this time of need would be shot. He had hoped for large numbers of Cape Afrikaners to rally to the Republican cause, but only a small band did so, along with a few thousand foreign volunteers, principally Dutchmen, Germans and Scandinavians. When British troops entered Bloemfontein on the 13th of March 1900, Reitz and others urged Kruger to destroy the gold mines, but he refused on the grounds that this would obstruct rehabilitation after the war. Mafeking was relieved 2 months later, and on the 30th of May, Lord Roberts took Johannesburg. Kruger left Pretoria on the 29th of May, travelling by train to Machadodorp, and on the 2nd of June the government abandoned the capital. Roberts entered 3 days later. With the major towns and the railways under British control, the conventional phase of the war ended. Kruger wired Steyn pondering surrender, but the Free State president insisted they fight to the bitter end. Kruger found new strength in Steyn and telegrammed all Transvaal officers forbidding the laying down of arms. Bitter einders, or in English, bitter enders, under Botha, Christian de Wet and Koos de la Rey, took to the veldt and waged a guerrilla campaign. British forces under Lord Kitchener applied a scorched earth policy in response, destroying the farmsteads owned by Boer guerrillas still active in the field. Non-combatants, mostly women and children, were put into what the British dubbed concentration camps. Kruger moved to a Waterval onder, where his small house became the Krugerhof in late June. After Roberts announced the annexation of the South African Republic to the British Empire on the 1st of September 1900, the Free State had been annexed on the 24th of May. Kruger proclaimed on the 3rd of September that this was not recognized and declared null and void. It was decided the following days that to prevent his capture, Kruger would leave for Lourenço Marques and there board a ship for Europe. Officially, he was on tour to the continent, and perhaps America too, to raise support for the Boer cause. Exile and Death. Kruger left the Transvaal by rail on the 11th of September 1900. He wept as the train crossed into Mozambique. He planned to board the first outgoing steamer, the Herzog, of the German East Africa Line, but was prevented from doing so at the behest of the local British consul. The Portuguese governor insisted that Kruger stay in the port under house arrest. About a month later, Queen Wilhelmina of the Netherlands concluded a deal with Britain to extricate Kruger on a Dutch warship, HNLMS Gelderland, and convey him through non-British waters to Marseille. Kruger was delighted to hear of this, but dismayed that Gesina, still in Pretoria, was not well enough to accompany him. Gelderland departed on the 20th of October 1900. He received a rapturous welcome in Marseille on the 22nd of November. 60,000 people turned out to see him disembark. Accompanied by Leeds, he went on to an exuberant reception in Paris, then continued to Cologne on the 1st of December. Here the public greeted him with similar excitement, but Kaiser Wilhelm II refused to receive him in Berlin. Having apparently still harbored hopes of a German assistance in the war, Kruger was deeply shocked. "The Kaiser has betrayed us," he told Leeds. They went on to the Netherlands, which was strictly neutral and could not assist militarily, but would feel more like home. After another buoyant reception from the general public, Kruger was cordially received by Wilhelmina and her family at The Hague. But it soon became clear to Leeds that it embarrassed the Dutch authorities to have them staying in the seat of the government. The Kruger party moved to Hilversum in April 1901. Gesina, with whom Kruger had 16 children, 9 sons and 7 daughters, of whom some died young, had 8 sickly grandchildren transferred to her from the concentration camp at Krugersdorp, where their mother had died in July 1901. 5 of the 8 children died within 9 days, and 2 weeks later, Gesina also died. Meintjes writes that a strange silence enveloped Kruger thereafter. By now, partially blind and almost totally deaf, he dictated his memoirs to his secretary Hermanus Christian, Meidi, Bredel, and Pieter Grobbeler during the latter part of 1901, and the following year they were published. Kruger and his entourage relocated in December 1901 to Utrecht, where he took a comfortable villa called Oranje List, and was joined by his daughter Elsie Elof and her family. Rhodes died in March 1902, bequeathing Groote Schuur to be the official residence of the future premiers of the unified South Africa. Kruger quipped to Bredel, "Perhaps I'll be the first." The war formally ended on the 31st of May 1902 with the signing of the Treaty of Vereniging. The Boer republics became the Orange River and the Transvaal colonies. Kruger accepted it was all over only when Bredel had the flags of South Africa Republic and the Orange Free State removed from outside Oranje List 2 weeks later. In reply to condolences from Germany, Kruger would only say, "My grief is beyond expression." Kruger would not countenance the idea of returning home, partly because of his personal reluctance to become a British subject again, and partly because he thought he could better serve his people by remaining in exile. Steyn similarly refused to accept the Boer defeat and joined Kruger in Europe, though he did later return to southern Africa. Botha, De Wet and Delarey visited Oranje List in August 1902, and according to hearsay, they were berated by Kruger for signing away the independence. Rumors of such a scene were widespread enough that the generals issued a statement denying them. After passing October 1902 to May 1903 at Menton on the French Riviera, Kruger moved back to Hilversum, then returned to Menton in October 1903. In early 1904 he moved to Clarence, a small village in the canton of Vaud in western Switzerland, where he spent the rest of his days. looking over Lake Geneva and the Alps from his balcony. He who wishes to create a future must not lose track of the past. He wrote in his final letter, addressed to the people of the Transvaal, thus: "Seek all that it is to be found good and fair in the past. Shape your ideal accordingly, and try to realize that ideal for the future. It is true, much that has been built is now destroyed, damaged, leveled. But with unity of purpose and unity of strength, that which has been pulled down can be built again." After contracting pneumonia, Paul Kruger died in Clarence on the 14th of July 1904 at the age of 78. His Bible laid open on a table beside him. Kruger's body was initially buried in The Hague, but was soon repatriated with British permission. After ceremonial laying in state, he was accorded a state funeral in Pretoria on the 16th of December 1904. The Vierkleur of the South African Republic draped over his coffin and buried in what is now called Heroes Acre in the Church Street Cemetery. Appraisal and Legacy. Academic opinion on Kruger is divided. To admirers, he was an astute reader of people, events, and law who faithfully defended a maligned nation and became a tragic folk hero. To critics, he was an anachronistic throwback, the stubborn, slippery guardian of an unjust cause and an oppressor of black Africans. "More nonsense has been written about him than anybody I know of," writes Meintjes, in whose view the true figure has been obscured by conflicting attempts to sabotage or whitewash his image. A veritable bog of hostility and sentiment, prejudice and deification, depicting Kruger as anything from saint to stuffy, mendacious savage. Rights and wrongs aside, Meintjes asserts Kruger is the central figure of Boer history and one of the most extraordinary of South Africans. Following the Union of South Africa under Botha in 1910, Kruger remained a vital force in South African politics and Afrikaner culture. The government wildlife reserve he had proclaimed in 1898 was expanded and dubbed Kruger National Park in 1926. In 1954, over half a century after its construction by Anton van Wouw, a bronze statue of Kruger in his characteristic doppersuit and top hat was erected in Church Square, Pretoria. Kruger stands atop a plinth, surrounded by 4 crouching Boers from different time periods. 13 years later, the South African Mint put his likeness on the Kruger Rand, a gold bullion coin still produced and exported in the 21st century. His home in Pretoria and farm in Boekenhoutsfontein are provincial heritage sites, the former of which is preserved to appear as it did in his time. Kruger gives his name to the town of Krugersdorp and many streets and squares in South Africa and other countries, especially the Netherlands and Belgium. This has on occasion led to controversy. In 2009, local authorities in St. Gallen, Switzerland renamed Krugerstrasse because of the racist associations. Clarence, Free State, was named after Kruger's last home in Switzerland. During the Second World War, Kruger's life story and image were appropriated by propagandists in Nazi Germany, who produced the biographic film Oom Kruger, Uncle Kruger, in 1941, to attack the British with Emil Jannings in the title role. The underdevelopment of South African administrative law until the late 20th century was, Davenport asserts, the direct result of Kruger's censure and dismissal of Chief Justice Akotsa in 1898 over the question of judicial review. Paul Kruger's name and fame he made himself, Lade said. It is sometimes said that he was illiterate. This is of course nonsense. He was certainly not learned, but he had a thorough knowledge of many things. In the lower spheres of diplomacy, Mr. Creer was a master. E.B. Iwan Muller asserted he was quick in detecting the false moves made by his opponents, and an adept in turning them to his own advantage. But of the large combinations, he was hopelessly inadequate. To secure a brilliant and conspicuous success today, he was ready to squander the prospects of the future. If, indeed, he had the power of forecasting them, he was what I believe soldiers would call a brilliant tactician, but a hopeless strategist. Soon after the Creer's death, Smuts told the British humanitarian campaigner Emily Hobhouse he typified the Boer character both in its brighter and darker aspects, and was no doubt the greatest man both morally and intellectually, whom the Boer race was so far produced. In his iron will and tenacity, his never-say-die attitude towards fate, his mystic faith in another world, he represented what is best in all of us. And I hope that stands true for everyone who does read and pick up the best of what he had to offer. Thank you very much for joining me on this series. This closes the Paul Kruger series, but stick around because there will be more to come. Hit the like button if you did enjoy the series, if you enjoyed this one particularly. Let us know in the comments down below if you think he was a tyrant or he was a deity figure. Hit the subscribe button to catch the next episode. The next series is coming out soon. And hit the bell notification icon because YouTube will let you know as soon as it drops. Thank you very much once again for watching. Have a great one, stay safe and stay strong.